Cool. Sounds good.
So, hi there, welcome back to the podcast where today I am rejoined, in fact, by Graham Burnett. Hello, Graham.
Hiya, Gerard. Nice to
Hi.
see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Graham, as always. So to give you a bit of an introduction, you run, in fact, let's start here by why we're here. We're going to talk about business and how you can sort of make your business more kind of environmentally friendly and hopefully go a little bit wider than that, as I said to you before we started recording, really. So where I'm coming from here is I run a web design company and I do green web hosting, meaning it's 100% powered by sustainable energy. And so I've been talking to these people at Brighton University called Clean Growth. And in the midst of talking to them, we're also thinking about how we can try and push this a bit further as well, rather than just that, how you can kind of make more of a sort of zero carbon footprint or whatever. And so then I thought, let's talk to Graham. And then I thought, let's turn it into a podcast because maybe there's other people might benefit as well. So that's where I'm coming from. You are the permaculture expert on my radar or whatever. And I'm sure you know a lot more about your achievements than I do, really. But you write for The Idler and it's Permaculture magazine as well. And and you run your own set up at spiralseed.co.uk. Do you want to talk a bit more about yourself, actually, so people can know where you're coming from?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the shortcut would be to have a look at the earlier podcasts. I'm probably going to a bit of, you find out about who I am and what I do and what our connections are and how we go back to, the early 1980s, if not possibly the late 70s. But so there's that long connection there with the through the kind of whole punk scene, in particular, I think the DIY side of the punk scene, the do it yourself, make your own fanzines, put out your own music on tapes or cassettes or self-financed record labels. So we got that kind of connection. And then just seeing our different paths over the years, and I guess mine has kind of ended up in, I think, permaculture, as I think we talked about, and I kind of gave a bit of an overview of what is permaculture in that earlier podcast, some of which we can maybe go over again, a little bit of a refresher or maybe slightly different take on permaculture. And when you got in touch, I thought it was a nice opportunity because I think quite often I end up talking about permaculture kind of in the context of gardening. People go, oh yeah, it's about kind of no dig beds, and it's about how to kind of capture and store water in your garden. It's about kind of shaping the landscape, about planting trees or whatever. But I think it's quite nice to think about maybe some of those principles and design methodologies outside of, maybe in a non-land-based context, around, you specifically said kind of business and enterprise and earning a livelihood and that stuff. So it's quite nice to have an opportunity to talk about permaculture in that context, which, hopefully that's what we'll kind of do.
Yeah,
I suppose, sorry. Yeah.
I was just going to say,
permaculture. Go on. No problem.
We should have a little traffic light system or something. You go.
I was just going to do a little quick recap of permaculture, I think.
Yeah.
So, which basically, I guess, it's a set of ideas and principles that emerged kind of in the late 1970s when people were kind of maybe becoming conscious that, the kind of post-war, I guess, we kind of really, fossil fuel driven, carbon driven society, I guess, kind of, the carbon driven world about kind of maybe 200 years ago, but really accelerating during the 20th century. And I guess in particular, kind of the late, or the late 1960s, 1970s, an awareness that, there was kind of cost to that, in terms of the environment, pollution, resource usage and all the rest of it. And so I guess permaculture came in response to that and thinking about, well, how can we actually live more lightly upon this kind of small planet of ours? And I think the definition I probably gave last time is permaculture is creating regenerative human habitats by following nature's patterns. So that is a kind of an instant soundbite definition. Hopefully, that kind of bit of a refresher of what we talked about last time. Anyway, sorry, over to you, Gerard.
That's cool. So yeah, I've always associated permaculture with gardening and with your more sort of hippie end of the kind of sociological spectrum, so to speak, which may not be fair, but that's certainly, I don't know, possibly a cliche. So that is an attempt to kind of look after the planet a bit better, get back to nature to some extent, and follow natural, sort of traditional natural ways of things, I suppose. In business, of course, you have these dichotomies as well, because ultimately capitalism is the driving force of the use of fossil fuels, it seems to me. Not that another system might not be equally or bad or worse, but this is the dichotomy I sort of feel, really. I run a business. I do my best to run it ethically. And I have no choice but to run a business because I don't want a job and I've got no other political system to live under, essentially. So here I am running a business and, sorting out my own freedom as best as I can within the sort of parameters that I live in. And so what I'm here to sort of ask you really is how I can apply kind of your type of values and techniques to me running a business. In my case, a web design business, could be any business really.
So I think it'd be quite interesting to kind of take some of those kind of ethics and principles in design thinking and applying it in that context. And we've spent quite a lot of time, as you mentioned, I run permaculture design courses. It's interesting the number of people who sign up to a permaculture design course, and at the start of the course we'll do a little exercise. What do you expect to get from this course? And go, oh yeah, I think I'll learn a load of gardening techniques. And by the end of it, it's like, we've covered kind of, how can you apply it? A lot of people end up kind of applying a lot of the stuff we're talking about to kind of livelihood and this kind of thing. And at the end, the people said, oh, I thought I was going to learn a bunch of kind of like cool gardening techniques. I'm like, you've just given me a whole bunch of tools to actually kind of redesign my whole life, including kind of business, community projects, all kinds of things. We do a session on the course where we actually kind of get folks to look at their livelihoods. We do a skills audit, what skills have people got, and it can be really wide ranging. It's like kind of skills, kind of things you've learned, kind of courses you've done, business experience you might have, training, hobbies, pastimes, things you enjoy doing. And then we get people to kind of think about, okay, you've kind of come up with this big list of things you can do, your abilities, and then we'll spend some time kind of thinking about which of those are kind of transferable and which of those kind of would you be happy to kind of, maybe share with others. And it's quite useful, gets people to really think about what is it they kind of want to do, how do they want to kind of, earn a livelihood. And as you said, we all live in this world, whatever our ideals are, we will have to make a living. We'll have to kind of pay the bills. You mentioned before we went on air, as it were, that kind of dichotomy between having a sense of values that are kind of maybe kind of anti-capitalist, yet we live in this kind of capitalist world. It doesn't matter what, However, we as individuals have to make a living. We have to pay our mortgage or pay the rent or pay for our electricity or pay for food. It's all about that kind of compromise, I guess, on what is the best, what is the best we can do. And I think permaculture is kind of quite useful in that respect, because its core, I think, we talked about this last time, the core of permaculture are these kind of three ethics: earth care, people care, and fair shares. And I guess that, we're always coming back to those in permaculture design. They're the things that we're always, at the center, if you like. We're always kind of checking in. This activity I'm about to do, or this venture I'm going to kind of, whether it's a business venture, whatever, does it kind of tick those boxes, if you like? Is there earth care evidence? Is there people care evidence? Is there sort of some attention given to this notion of fair shares? And we can unpack those, what those ethics might mean, and they mean different things, I guess, to different people. You mentioned that with the is it Abisti?
Yeah,
Abisti.
yeah.
The
To pronounce. Yeah,
yeah. That it's, the earth care you're talking about, you're already kind of it's low carbon in terms of solar powered, that kind of stuff.
our web hosting is 100% powered by wind and solar, so it's all sustainable, as are our server offices, or the offices of the servers we use. So that's all good. And we also plant a tree for every new customer with a company called Future Forests up in Scotland. And this is great. Well, doesn't blow my own trumpet there. This is something I'm very pleased to be doing. But I've got this kind of nagging rumbling under the floorboards that it's not really enough. That there's a lot of companies now. I mean, I started planting trees 20 years ago, roughly, a bit more actually now. And so that's hardly a new thing, but a lot of companies are doing that now, and that's great. Ultimately, what I would like to see is every company doing that, despite the damage it would probably do us in terms of not being able to boast about it anymore. The bigger picture is to sort of hopefully see the likes of GoDaddy planting a tree every time and running on 100% sustainable energy, and so on and so forth. That leaves me in two places, though. Of course, firstly, that's great. But secondly, it makes it difficult for my business. So I need to keep ahead of the curve, and B, I've just got this rumbling under the floorboards that there is more I could be doing, and also that it might make me feel better to be doing more on a business level that is more kind of ethical, and there may be things I haven't thought about. Essentially, I'd like my business to be as congruent with my values as is humanly possible, really. And so, yeah, I'm sort of. I went on holiday last week, well, 3 days, and I won a competition, would you believe, and for a holiday voucher. So I just went to this holiday cottage quite near where we live. Just spent 3 days walking in nature, and it really kind of reconnected me and made me realise that's where I'm at home, and that's what I love, and so on. And I'd really like that to shine through more. And of course, in a web design business, there's another dichotomy there, because the internet is responsible for pretty much as much damage as the airline industry. And of course, one gets a lot more bad press than the other one on this front. So on the one hand, I'm reducing the damage as much as I can, but I want to get more proactive with it. Do you have any thoughts or ideas on that?
Okay. Well, so, it sounds like you're already doing a lot in the kind of the earth care area, as you summarised there. I guess a couple of the other aspects I'll just talk about would be the people care, which is actually, taking care of the people that, I don't know if you employ other people or how many you employ or that kind of thing. Do you employ others?
Well, it's me and my wife. How well I take care of her, you'd probably have to ask. I suppose. And we also outsource to a team we've been working with for a long time in India. So that's possibly a more complicated thing, because I have obviously got no desire to control what they do. Truthfully, I'm not in charge of them as such. They're just a company that we work
Mm.
with. Uh, so that's the setup. Really, is just the kind of the two of us here. So we
Okay.
don't have an office. Therefore, there's no commuting. There's no extra office energy usage and so on and so forth.
Okay.
In terms of people care, that's quite interesting because we do work from home, and
Hmm.
there is a sort of people care issue there because we're always at work
Mm.
as
Mm.
well. So, in terms of self-compassion, uh,
Mm.
there is
Mm.
something we have to be very, very careful about, basically.
Sure, sure. Yes, I think, yeah. So in that respect, there's kind of only the two of you, but I guess there might be, you might think about, um you're talking about the outsourcing, kind of like, checking out the ethics of the company that you're at, what are their, do they have an ethical kind of policy, or, and is it kind of, what is the quality of that policy? I guess, kind of sometimes, I mean, I guess you're very aware of the concept of, the kind of the greenwashing thing that, a lot of companies will just kind of
Mm,
say, yeah, we're doing
yeah,
this, we're good to the environment, and, they'll kind of, quite a lot of, it's what, and I guess that ties in with the fair shares thing a little bit as well, kind of what, you know, which is all about, I guess, the equitable distribution of resources. I think the saying is, what's it, Gandhi, there's enough for all of our needs, but not for all of our greed. And I guess there's something around that, so, excuse me, the ethics of, of the people you're outsourcing to, maybe possibly, that might be a thing to think about.
mm,
Um, I think, yeah, and with the people care one, I think, we can forget, and I think you touched on it, that it's not just about employees, that kind of thing. It's self-care as well. You're a person, I'm a person, it's like kind of taking care of your own kind of well-being needs. And, I think, I mean, with a slightly different hat on, you've written books and you're a practitioner of kind of mindfulness and that kind of stuff, which
yeah,
sounds like a
yeah, that's
good,
right.
you
Yeah,
know, those kind of practices around kind of mindfulness, good diet, whatever that might mean to you or to anybody else, getting enough exercise. Maybe I think we're probably both a little bit guilty of this. Maybe not drinking so much alcohol. I think we're both rather
yeah,
rather
yeah,
keen on our beers, as I understand. But
absolutely. Yeah,
but maybe having some mindful awareness around that stuff. And kind of, I don't know what your kind of spiritual beliefs are, but kind of having some attention around that stuff. I think so people care isn't just like, oh, pay your workers well, or make sure workers have got kind of decent rights and all the rest of it, but there is the self-care side of it, I think, which we quite often, particularly, and I think particularly as a kind of freelancer or self-employed person, we can quite easily neglect our own people care, our own self-care. We're all kind of guilty, forever talking about it, like I'm talking about it now to you. But forever talking about this stuff on courses and then kind of thinking, then you kind of like, do all this stuff yourself, and like drink too much or stay up too late or work, don't have clear boundaries around kind of work and
mm,
work time and leisure time and rest time and stuff. And, we're the worst, us kind of, the freelancers and self-employed. But I think it's just kind of maybe setting those boundaries and stuff, might be good. Good kind of people care kind of practices, possibly.
what
So,
about
yeah, I think well, I was just, I'd say that core thing, maybe the earth care, people care, fair shares is a good thing to always come back to, kind of a centering thing, and it's sometimes called like the three legs of the three-legged stool of permaculture. If you think of a stool, it it needs, if it's only got two legs, it will collapse, but it actually doesn't need more than three legs. So they're the kind of legs that hold it up, if you like. If you think of permaculture as a seat, the ethics of those kind of legs that's
mm,
holding that seat stable. And quite often, if you take one of those legs away, the stool will kind of collapse. So, so if you're kind of maybe giving a lot of attention to the earth care, doing all the stuff around reducing your carbon footprint, reducing resource usage, but not actually thinking about the people care side of things, you're going to kind of have an unbalance there. And same with the fair shares. Does that make sense? So I think that's a useful thing to kind of always
Yeah,
come back to,
absolutely, it makes sense. Yeah, yeah. I was quite interested to talk about greenwashing because I was thinking
Mm,
about that
mm,
word before we started, really, and thinking I'm not altogether sure what it means because the way I've always looked at, for instance, the big explosion you've got of vegan food in supermarket meats, plant-based, what
mm,
they call it now, isn't it? Um,
mm,
a lot of that stuff is just crap. It's got to be as bad for you as meat, I would think, on a health level. But
mm,
on another level, I'm thinking, well, I don't care as long as the animals aren't suffering. Then I'm thinking of that as a good thing. But of course, it is a double-edged thing in that respect because you're talking about
mm,
hyper
mm,
or ultra processed food, so on and so
mm.
forth. So that's what I was
And the
thinking about.
land use as well, the land use is just as an environmental damage. I've just published a piece on my a kind of blog post on my website about actually, having a little bit of, sorry, going on slight aside here, but actually, um, exactly, if the production systems are still in that industrialized model, the land use is going to be just the same, the kind
Right.
of soil erosion, water, all those kind of things. You've taken maybe the animal abuse component, out of it, but the rest of it is still just as destructive, really. So we need we need to really reimagine our whole agricultural system and our whole every system, really, including, the web. It's not going to go away. While we still have fossil fuels, it won't go away. So, reimagining the ethics around that, and there's a whole lot of work to be done there, I think, as you probably
Mm.
agree.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Do you have any specific thoughts on how Joe Blogg's average business can sort of make a better contribution?
Um, well, I guess, yeah, it's um I wouldn't want to be kind of prescriptive because I think everybody is in a different place, different situation. Like I say, coming back to those ethics all the time, I think a useful thing to do probably, whether it's a business or just kind of a household, is start off. One of the, if we look at there's kind of like one of the permaculture design processes is to actually kind of go through, first of all, we call it a little acronym, GoSADIM. So it's Go and then it's SADIM. And so the Go would stand for goal setting. So that might be about spending some time thinking about what is it, what is the thing you want to get to? What is that vision? It's the big picture vision thinking. Might be about kind of creating a mission statement, something like that, and then because what's that quote? Rogers and Hammerstein or Captain Sensible, depending on your age, from
You've got
that
to have a
song.
dream, presumably.
Yeah, before you can have a dream come true. So it's about that kind of the big, what's the dream? What's the big vision here? And then, so yeah, I guess basically the question would be, what do I want? And then, so setting that first of all. And then the second question, the S in this framework, we kind of survey, which what have I got? And that might be about doing, if it's a business, it might be doing some kind of audit on where you're at now. Yeah, there's all kinds of templates, I'm sure. I'm just thinking, I know there's a kind of quite, you can get kind of, there's a book, and I haven't got it to hand, unfortunately. Like thinking about, as a household, you can kind of do an audit on looking at what is your kind of energy use, how much water you're using, how much kind of waste are you producing each week, what's going in, in terms of kind of like, what are you buying, or what kind of, for a business, what kind of stationery, I don't know, so gathering all that information in the land, you'd be looking at things like, the direction the wind is coming from, or what quality soil you've got, or where, kind of rivers are, or that kind of stuff, But I guess applied to a household, I'd say it might be about kind of the money coming in, energy, as I just said, energy usage, what consuming. So kind of getting all that kind of data in before you're kind of thinking about what you're going to change. It's sort of thinking what's going on already. So it's about kind of pulling in as much information as possible. And then I guess the next thing will be the A in that process, would be the analysis. Actually, then you're kind of analysing that and thinking a bit kind of critically about it. Maybe thinking what are your kind of limiting factors around what, in terms of the land, that might be, thinking about your soil. If it's kind of a heavy clay soil, that's going to limit certain things you can grow. Or if you've got a really sandy soil, that's going to have limits the other way of what you can grow. If you've got like, frosts in certain places in the garden, that's going to kind of limit again what you can grow at different times of the year. And then just thinking about, I guess in a business context, you'd be thinking the same way, does that make sense?
It does, yeah. Yeah. Are you going to finish your acronym?
Yeah, I'll go. Maybe I'll go through this
I'll come
quickly as a
back to something
process, and then we can
afterwards, but
think.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So yeah, kind of the the goal setting, getting your vision, your dream, kind of mission statement stuff, and then it's kind of the observation or survey, which is kind of pulling in all that kind of doing an audit where you're at now, as I just said, and then the analysis, kind of thinking about what are those limiting factors. And think about what are the resources, what are those, which of those things are potential resources. And then that's when you kind of, once you've kind of got all that information, then that's when you get to the design and then thinking about what do I need to change? Where can I tweak things? What needs to be adjusted? In terms of the land, it might be thinking about, well, now I've kind of figured out where the frost is. I've kind of figured out, what kind of soil I've got. Like, this might be the best place to plant some apple trees, or this might be the best place to put a pond, or this might be the best place to put a solar panel, where it's going to maximize the solar gain. So that's design, where you're putting all that stuff down. And then it's kind of actually, so you've got your great design, and then the next stage, the I, is the implementation. How are you actually going to do this stuff? And might be stuff there around, kind of, I guess that's where your kind of project management comes in, that kind of stuff. This thing needs to happen before that thing can happen, all the kind of timelines and all that kind of stuff. What needs to happen first? What needs to happen maybe, second, third, in this. And then once that's all in place, I guess it's about maintenance and management and how you can kind of manage this system. And then, of course, some sort of process of evaluation, like what's working, what's not working. Oh, I tried this thing, turned out to be a really crap idea, or it turned out to be a really great idea. We'll do more of that, and do less of the thing that was a bit crap. And then we started putting on the end of this a little C for celebration, actually to step back. We've evaluated, but actually look back and, yeah, we did all right, actually, So in terms of the land-based project, we might be having, parties or apple days or, harvest festivals or community parties, that kind of thing. And I kind of like that GoSADIM framework, because I think you can apply it to anything, really, anything that's kind of took there about land, but you could see possibly that could apply to a business or an enterprise. It could be a community project. It could be just like planning a meal. You know, look at what's in the, you know, what's the goal? Oh, to cook a nice curry. What's in the cupboard? Oh, I've got some lentils. I've got some rice. I've got these veggies in the in the fridge or whatever. And then, kind of you go through the same process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. It also makes me think about partnerships as well. Who you choose to work with
Mm,
is also
absolutely, yeah.
an ethical decision, isn't it? Like, as you touched on before, I guess, with the outsourcing, really. One thing that keeps coming up in my head here, you were talking about fair shares and so on and so forth. And I'm picturing kind of entrepreneurs watching this. And I'm
Hmm.
thinking entrepreneurship and indeed a lot of spiritual stuff, certainly in the contemporary age, focuses on abundance essentially, uh, and as such, is probably aimed at people who haven't got as much abundance as they want and so forth. So I'm just wondering how much of this also comes down to economics, how difficult a sell it is on an economic basis, because I remember a Stiff Little Fingers song, was it Silver Lining, I think. I want an equal share, even if that means I have to give.
Mm,
Which I
mm,
thought was a great line, but I don't think it would have been a very popular one if he'd have been a politician. So
mm,
it seems like economics is a very touchy one, really, a bit of a kind of almost an elephant in the room, actually, potentially. I'm thinking here. Do you find that? Do you find resistance when you're teaching permaculture from people who haven't got enough and get a bit sort of touchy about that?
It's interesting you use the word abundance there, actually, because I think that is, and again, it's kind of maybe reframing what we kind of maybe need or mean by kind of economics sometimes. I've got a kind of crib sheet here I'm going to hold up. I don't know how clear that is,
Oh,
which
yeah, I
I'll
can see
kind of
that.
go
Yeah,
through.
yeah.
Okay. What I can do is put an image of it up that you could maybe
I could put
drop
it under
in.
the video. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, this is something I was going to talk a little bit further down the line, but I'll talk about it now. One of the kind of principles of permaculture is this not idea that yield is theoretically unlimited, or yield is limited only by our imagination. And what we tend to think of as yield is like, I'm going back to the garden, kind of allotment, land-based place. Because quite often I think gardening is quite often a metaphor for, a wider context. So I'll give the example here of how we think about yield. Say, March, April, on my allotment, I plant 10 kilograms of potatoes, and then kind of in September, I come and dig them up, and hopefully there'll be 100 kilograms of potatoes. And we think of that as the yield, 90 kilograms of potato more than we put in.
Right.
But then thinking, actually, so if someone says, what was the yield of your allotment? I said, well, I grew 90 kilograms of potatoes. So what other yields did you get from your allotment? Well, I got exercise, I was out in the fresh air. So exercise, it was had some opportunities for mindfulness. I could just be kind of, just spend some time chilling down there. I had kind of well-being, kind of yields, if you like, just being out in that fresh air, enjoying the exercise, chatting to the person on the next plot. Maybe they gave me some of their, excess harvest. So I've got some extra stuff from them, and I found I grew too many potatoes, so I shared some with them. It's a green space, it's just like, all the wildlife that's hanging out on the allotment, the trees and all the various plants and stuff. Yeah, just all that kind of work. Once you start thinking, yield is pretty much unlimited. It's like limited only by your kind of creativity and imagination. So I think thinking about yield, it's not just about in terms of livelihood. It's not just about, you go to work and I've earned, I don't know, however much, 50 quid an hour, or, £500 a week, or whatever it is. And that's kind of, what other things are you getting from how how you're making your livelihood, if you like. Yeah, well, I will just talk through this kind of mind map I held up.
Yeah, do.
This is actually, and this was kind of one of the most important for me from permaculture. Is one of the most important kind of, when you come across a concept that really kind of changes things, sort of, you know. So this is work from a guy called Ethan Rowland, who's an American permaculture teacher, and he's written a book called Regenerative Enterprise, Optimizing for a Multicultural Abundance, and his project is called Appleseed Permaculture. I can send you a link later to sort of his stuff and that, but
Okay.
he talks about this idea of there being at least 8 forms of capital. And I guess capital, it's one of those kind of words, you mentioned capitalism and being an anti-capitalist. And so I guess it's kind of quite a loaded word. So we can kind of shy away. Oh, I don't want to talk about capital and capitalism. But if we take the word capital down back to its kind of root, what the words actually mean, it's sort of something one can accumulate, and it's something that has some sort of currency, so you can either spend it, you can kind of earn it, or you can acquire, you can not so much earn, you can acquire capital and kind of store it, and at the same time you can spend capital. So if we take that as meaning what is capital, and I guess the forms of capital we'd immediately think of is financial, money, basically. And I guess the currency there will be things like, said, money, coinage, sterling, financial institutions, thinking around that stuff. And that's the one we're very familiar with. But another form of capital, material, which is kind of stuff, if you like, resources, tools, buildings, infrastructure, building materials, timber, all that kind of stuff. So I guess they're the two that we think of when we think of capital. We think of money and stuff. But Ethan Rowland kind of argues, and I tend to agree, when we start broadening our understanding of capital or other forms of capital, he talks about social capital, that we can kind of acquire social capital. We can spend social capital in terms of our kind of friendships, influence, relationships, that kind of stuff. And we can kind of, we can build that up through kind of, helping out other people. If you're good company at a party, we've got lots of friends, you're kind of acquiring kind of social capital. At the same time, we can spend or diminish our social capital, if we're constantly, if you never get your round in the pub or whatever, or you're kind of, taking the piss out, or, kind of like exploitative, you can kind of spend that, so you can build up social capital. At the same time, you can kind of lose it as well. And he talks about intellectual capital, which would be things around kind of ideal currency, would be kind of ideas, knowledge, notions around kind of maybe intellectual property, this kind of thing. And obviously we can, by learning, we're kind of, that will be our intellectual. If I go on a course, or if I read a book that tells me how to play a guitar or play the piano, I've acquired that intellectual capital. If I go on a gardening course and learn how to, whatever it is, so we kind of, learning new stuff will be our intellectual capital. And then next to that one is experiential capital, where the currency, there will be action, embodied experience, wisdom. So in a way, I mentioned that if I buy a book or watch some YouTube videos telling me how to play the guitar, I've quite, I know what an A chord is and an E chord, and I maybe know the scales. I've got intellectual capital, but it's not until you've kind of been doing it for a while and you've practiced and you've kind of learned, got it into kind of muscle memory and stuff, that you then could maybe say, yeah, I'm a semi-competent guitarist. Now, do you know what I mean? Which would be your experience. It's one thing to learn something, to actually kind of put it into practice kind of takes time. Does that make sense?
Theory and practice.
And
We'll come back to that. Yeah.
yeah, I guess it is that in a way. And then I think I've touched on, what did I say? I said financial, material, social, intellectual, experiential, and the others are living capital, which would be kind of carbon, nitrogen, water, soil, plants, trees, ecosystems, living organisms, and we can build that up. That's possibly one of the most important forms of capital. To creating living capital, getting carbon into the soil, planting more trees, restoring our water courses, restoring damaged ecosystems, building up biodiversity. So that'd be our living capital. And the last couple would be Ethan Ronan frames it as spiritual capital, which he frames as things like faith, intention, karma, spiritual attainment. I personally don't consider myself particularly spiritual, so I tend to frame it as well-being. So we can have, or maybe it's a ninth form, I don't know. But for me, it's that kind of well-being, all that stuff around kind of mindfulness that we were talking about. So we can build that up, our kind of faith. And the last form of capital he talks about is cultural, which are those kind of shared, which is kind of almost a shared form of capital. All the others, an individual, or, you or I can kind of build up our kind of financial capital. We can contribute to living capital. We can build up our own social capital, blah, blah, blah. But cultural is one that it's a shared, it's to do with, shared, that's around story, ritual, myths, kind of collective myths, that kind of stuff. So it's kind of collective rather than individual.
Yeah.
So that was a kind of overview of those 8 forms of capital, and the fact that they kind of transform as they move from one to another in a way. Like your living capital, you might be kind of planting kind of 50 trees or something like that, and then a few years later you need to kind of build a house or something like that, so you'd be cutting those trees down. So you change them from being living capital into kind of being material capital now. Does that make sense? And then if you're selling that wood on, perhaps that timber, then that's converted into kind of financial capital and so forth. Does that make sense? So it kind of moves around. Yeah, and I found this model really, really useful when thinking about my own situation. Briefly, my story here. I did a permaculture design course in, I think, 1997, I think, and I've got introduced so many kind of cool projects and so many excellent things going on in London that I kind of got really involved in the whole kind of permaculture scene and started doing a little bit of teaching of permaculture. On the course that I'd kind of just finished, I kind of started doing sessions on it. And then over time, that teaching grew into kind of quite a main, I was doing a lot of it. And then I got to the point where I was working in my day job, like kind of 5 days a week. And then practically every weekend I was teaching permaculture. This isn't, we talked about sustainability. That's not sustainable. So, but also an income was coming in. So I kind of thought from that, so I thought, well, actually I can afford to cut down to 3 days a week in my day job go part-time, and then, you know, that frees up some time. And then I kind of developed a bit of a plan there to sort of like over time phase out, you know, the kind of the day job and move over to kind of teaching permaculture and writing and all kinds of other activities. Oh, we'll talk about polycultural incomes in a moment as well, but hold that to one side.
Good for
But yeah,
Scrabble.
basically, okay. No, I'll talk about it now very quickly. When I was in that kind of interim phase, uh, um, you know, I wasn't kind of earning enough really to make up the shortfall of what I was kind of no longer earning in my day job. So it's kind of doing, you know, being prepared to do a bit of this and do a bit of that. And, you know, like for me, I was doing some agency work at some care homes and stuff like that. I was driving, doing some minibus driving, you know, dropping people off at, you know, the day centre where they attend. So doing, you know, being, you know, you're kind of doing lots of little income streams coming in, sort of thing. Does that make sense? So this
Yeah,
idea of
yeah. I'd like to definitely come back to the whole income thing,
okay,
but
okay, but anyway, back to this kind of 8 forms of capital model and
yeah,
how I found it helpful. I actually got to the point, yeah, because it kind of went on the back burner because I got really ill around 2010, 2011, which kind of put my plans back a few years. But by about 2017, you know, I was like, thought, well, I really want to kind of take the jump, you know, the big leap from, you know, having that safety net of a part-time, you know, job that was part-time by then to kind of being fully kind of free. And when I kind of did the maths, like, you know, wouldn't, you know, financially, it really wasn't adding up, you know, I thought I really can't afford to do this. But then I applied this model, you know, this 8 forms capital model. And I thought, well, what about all these other things that aren't money that are going to come from this? You know, there'll be the social, you know, the social capital. You know, I've got loads of connections, all the kind of networks I'm in, the permaculture networks, punk networks, you know, all these different kind of, you know, arts, you know, some involvement with the arts, you know, local art projects and art galleries and stuff like that. So yeah, there's that. There's, you know, the living capital. I could spend more time on my allotment. I could be planting more trees. I could maybe grow, you know, more, take cuttings, grow those cuttings on, share them with other people, which again feeds into the social capital and potentially maybe sell a few, earn a little bit of money as well. I've got more time to kind of study and learn stuff, the intellectual capital, got more kind of time for the experiential. And, you know, and more time for my own kind of well-being. I could spend more time maybe, you know, in meditation or doing art or something that, you know, that kind of stuff. And the cultural thing, you know, being part of a, you know, contributing more to kind of, you know, the making Southend, you know, kind of a better place, if you like, in those kind of shared. And when I applied that model, I thought, well, there's, you know, I really can't justify not leaving my day job. And, you know, best thing I ever did, you know, that one has all that kind of anxiety around. I don't know if you've ever worked have you always been self-employed or you've worked
yeah,
for,
yeah. I've always had an allergy to real work. Yeah.
right. But for me, it was always like you know, like a real fear actually being, you know, having, you know, being in control of that stuff. But actually, the best thing I ever did, you know, it's great.
Well, that's
Um,
what I wanted to come on to. Um, I've made a few little notes here, and I think they all kind of fit
mhm,
together. Um, I deliberately used the word abundance before because I
mhm,
agree with you. There are various different ways in which you can be abundant, but economics. The way I look at it is this, okay? World War II happens, blah, blah, blah. Then the hippies happen. And out of the hippies, well, actually, before the hippies, you get the civil rights movement, and in
mhm.
America in particular, and they make quite uh, astonishing gains through the power of collective action. and out of the hippies comes what knows itself as the new left. And I would say that there is a lineage between what was the new left to what then became punk rock, or at least, you know, the kind of
mm,
aspect of
mm,
punk rock that we were kind of involved in, and so on and so forth. But the whole, and then out of that, pretty much, you know, and out of the hippies and so on, comes all the kind of the self-help movement, if you like, the self-improvement
mm,
movement, we,
mhm,
and so on. But as this is all going along, what is being eroded is the power of collective bargaining, and indeed the concept
mm,
of collective bargaining, and it's being
mm,
replaced by sort of mass individualization, or the me generation, or whatever, you know, where people are kind of much more interested in themselves, much more insular, and so on and so forth. So, listening to you talking about those things, they're all great. That, I mean, from that
mhm,
book, um, they're all great. But it seems to me that people, well, I believe, in fact, that people in any given situation have a choice between love and fear, and or creativity and fear, if you like. And fear,
mm,
being a more low vibration type thing, is obviously not good for your health, etc., etc. But fear is where a lot of people are at, particularly right now. We're recording this in September 2023. There's a lot of talk about the cost of living crisis. There's people who are, you know, uh, just really, really in the shit economically,
mm,
essentially.
mm,
And I'm wondering how much of this stuff can be put into practice as opposed to just sound like a nice theory if you're
mm,
struggling to pay your bills. This is, and this kind of also ties in with business, essentially. You know, business is ultimately business within the framework we live has got to be about making a profit. You've got to make more than you spend, because on top of your business, you have to then take money out to pay your rent and your bills, and so on
mm,
and so
mm,
forth. So I'm just wondering if kind of this comes up in permaculture, really, where um, how you can kind of move from fear into creativity, how you can do all those kind of really nice sounding mindsets about capital
mm,
without your economic capital being sorted. Does that make sense?
mm. It does, yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. I can't talk through that model, but a couple of other things, you know, kind of maybe well, I am in a somewhat privileged position in that I, our kids had all left home by then; they'd all grown up and moved away. Very importantly, we paid our mortgage off by this time, and also, and I think this is a key thing as well, is we were debt free. And actually, we didn't have a huge amount of debt anyway, but we paid, you know, any loans that were kind of kicking around, we made sure they were all paid off. So we were starting from this place of, you know, worst case scenario, when your mortgage is paid and you haven't got any big debts, you know, worst case scenario is like, you know, you might not be able to pay your electric bill or something, you know, which did look like a possibility not so long ago, you know. But so yeah, so I think it's important to kind of make that point. And I think one can be, you know, if you're just standing there in front of a room full of people going, yeah, just take this 8 forms of capital and ditch your day job sort of thing, then that can be possibly a little bit glib, and to say the least. But yeah, I think that come back to what you said about, you know, collective bargaining and the new left and that whole thing around collective bargaining, and the fact that, you know, the unions were basically, you know, Thatcher and that kind of libertarian, you know, neoliberalism that basically, you know, kind of moved that paradigm, you know, so that kind of, there is no such thing as society, as she kind of famous, you know, that it's basically, it's a world where it's every man or every person for themselves, you know, and rather than that kind of sense before that actually, I don't know, the Tories have used this, you know, we're all in this together, when obviously blatantly we're not, you know, around the COVID time, you know, it's like we're all in this together unless you're us, and we're kind of partying and giving massive contracts to our kind of pals, you know, for this, that, and the other. But there was certainly, you know, I think in the 60s, in the 70s, there was a sense of, you know, the collective, which we've kind of moved away. And I don't know how, I don't know what the answer, I guess because we're in that time, does that make sense? We're actually, I think quite often you don't see I was talking about this to somebody else the other day, these kind of social movements that you don't kind of realize that a social movement is going on until you kind of can look back on it, or a wave, as it were, these kind of waves. We were talking about this very thing, like the post-war, kind of social contracts and, some of the progressive things, and we seem to be in a particularly non-progressive time, and it can be, hard work to kind of, remain optimistic. I don't know if I am always optimistic, but I think we do the best we can. You do what you do because it's who you are. I think, I think that's the thing Penny Rambo, from Crass has sort of said before, that in a way it doesn't matter what happens in the world. It's kind of, you do what you do because it's, in a sense, you don't have a choice, I guess, or it could be easy to become kind of overwhelmed. But yeah, I think I waffled away from the point from the question. But
I'll tell you what the question ultimately is actually thinking about. We're talking about making businesses green and so on and so forth.
yeah,
Really,
yeah.
is ethical business a privilege, or does it need privilege to enforce, or I guess that's a parameter rather than a yes/no question. But are there examples in nature where we can look to for examples of being ethical without economic abundance?
Well, I think definitely, as Kropotkin would have argued, and why I kind of maybe still identify as an anarchist, would be, the writings of people like Kropotkin around kind of mutual aid and stuff, that actually there are loads of examples of mutual aid. In fact, the mutual aid would seem to actually be the norm rather than, it's kind of almost, competition is a thing, obviously, but, the kind of Darwin, or not necessarily Darwin, but the interpretations of Darwin that were around in that kind of Victorian capitalist era when capitalism was being kind of, fomenting. And of course, the work of people like Darwin was taken as, look, it's in nature, it's natural to compete. It's natural for, nature red in tooth and claw and all that kind of stuff. But there's just as much stuff, as much evidence that cooperation and mutual aid is actually just as much a driver in the natural world. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was thinking of wolves actually then, and the way
Okay, all right.
when wolves walk along, they have
Yeah.
the weakest at the front and the strongest at the back in a line. And yeah, I'm sure you know a lot more about examples than I do, but yeah, I'd like to think, that cooperation is nature's natural model. Like you say, competition is also quite a lot there, and lions chasing antelopes and all that sort of stuff. But
Yeah. Well, what the stuff that I'm, again, this kind of, stuff we touch on in permaculture, and again, might be a way when we think about, how can we rethink, business and society and how communities are. If we think about, the forest model, how forest and those kind of mycorrhizal relationships. So yeah, I might go down a bit of a rabbit hole. Is this okay?
it's
Time
okay.
wise
Yeah,
here.
I don't know what that means though.
Okay,
Micro.
so yes, okay. So there it's basically plants create their food through photosynthesis. They can take they'll take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and they'll convert that carbon, through photosynthesis, they'll convert that carbon into foods, carbohydrates and sugars and stuff like that. And that's where they get their kind of fuel to kind of, do their stuff. We can't do that. we have to get our kind of nutrients and our carbohydrates second hand by eating either the plants that have converted that sunlight into biomass, or other animals, through meat and stuff like that. But it's basically second-hand carbohydrates. Is this making sense so far?
Yeah.
So we get ours. We can't make our own. We have to get ours second-hand by eating plants. Fungi are the same. They don't have. They can't generate chlorophyll, so they don't have the mechanisms to take carbon out the atmosphere and convert it into food. They have to get theirs secondhand. The only difference is their stomachs are on, they'll kind of, their stomachs are kind of on the outside. They'll kind of break down, or I don't want to say the word breakdown, but in some cases this is basically this. I told you I was going to go down a rabbit hole here. Basically, what happens? Fungi have three ways of getting their nutrients. They can either feed on dead plant matter, so your things like your shiitake mushrooms, oyster mushrooms, those sort of things. They're kind of breaking down. They're converting dead wood into the nutrients they require. And then we've got parasitic fungi, which will take their nutrients from a plant or a tree, but they give nothing back. Does that make sense? So they're taking those carbohydrates and they're kind of not putting anything. It's a one-way relationship. And then we have symbiotic. Sorry, my brain was slipping there. Our symbiotic fungi, which actually have a mutually beneficial. So they're getting their nutrients from the tree, but they're kind of it's a two-way relationship. So what happens? You've got the mycorrhiza, which is actually kind of a combination of fungi and roots. So what will happen? The kind of there's the root hair under the soil. There's the kind of like mycelium of the fungi, and they'll kind of meet, and they kind of combine to become this kind of joint organism, if you like.
Yeah, right.
And through this kind of interaction that's going on, so the fungi can then access the carbohydrates that it needs, but at the same time, it's created this kind of network under the soil. So it's making all these nutrients available to the tree that it might otherwise not be able to get hold of, things like phosphorus, potassium, nitrogen, stuff like that. And kind of scientists have known, or gardeners have known about this kind of mycorrhizal relationship. So it's myco means like mycelium.
Okay,